All right, so as Brittany mentioned, my name is Ryan Nerney. I'm a managing partner at Tully Rinckey. And today's webinar is going to be going over Adjudicative Guideline G, which is alcohol consumption. And this is adjudicative guidelines related to national security clearances. Just a disclaimer, today's webinar is not intended to be legal advice. This is essentially just an overview of what Guideline G is. And the views expressed in this publication are mine and do not imply any endorsement by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Intelligence Community, or any other government agency. So as Brittany indicated, the topics of discussion today are going to be obviously based upon Guideline G. What is Guideline G? What are the common disqualifying conditions and mitigating conditions? And then if there's any other guidelines that can be or typically are combined with Guideline G when security concerns are raised. So specifically, what is Guideline G? Guideline G is one of 13 adjudicative guidelines laid out in the SEAD 4, which is the Security Executive Agent Directive 4. Essentially, it's the guidance for national security clearances and individuals who can and should get a security clearance. Essentially what the adjudicators look at when determining if somebody should get a clearance or not. So Guideline G is the alcohol consumption guideline. Alcohol consumption is just the general heading that they use, but it encompasses a whole bunch of different things, not only just alcohol use, but potential criminal conduct. If you're diagnosed with any type of alcohol-related issue that potentially could diminish your judgment, anything along those lines would be covered under Guideline G. Specifically under the SEAD 4, this guideline is raised when excessive alcohol consumption leads to an exercise of questionable judgment, or the failure to control any impulses can raise questions about an individual's reliability and trustworthiness. Essentially, to simplify things, if you have an alcohol problem, or if there's alcohol-related conduct, that calls into question not only your judgment, but it could also make you more susceptible to vulnerability for any type of clearance-related issues, to divulge national security secrets, things along those lines. So as far as the disqualifying conditions go, Guideline G provides 7 disqualifying conditions. The most common disqualifying conditions are alcohol-related incidents away from work. This includes DUIs, public intoxication. It can even be, domestic violence related to alcohol. Anything where alcohol was a contributing factor can also be under this guideline. So typically that's what we see, fighting, child abuse, spousal abuse, anything, as the guideline says, anything that could raise some potential concerns related to judgment. And again, this is not necessarily something that you would have to be, actually charged for. It could be an arrest. It could be anything along those lines. Also, this includes alcohol-related incidents at work, right? So if you show up to work under the influence of alcohol, you get in a fight at work because of alcohol, drinking on the job, anything along those lines. It could be obviously not only an issue related to your clearance, but also just the job in general. Now, I also mentioned that it can be something beyond criminal, right? And that for the disqualifying conditions, that also includes any habitual or binge consumption of alcohol. If you're looking on the DoD side, the Department of Defense side, they don't always require you to undergo your own evaluation when alcohol use becomes a concern. But if you're going to an organization or trying to get a clearance with the Department of Energy, they typically do require you to undergo a substance abuse evaluation, which then in turn determines if they're going to issue you a statement of reasons. A summary of security concerns is what it's called for the Department of Energy. But if they're going to issue one of those for you. So that's where habitual or binge consumption of alcohol comes into play. And also diagnosis. So if you're diagnosed with an alcohol use disorder, that could, essentially impair your judgment. That also is a concern. Now, the fact that you have an alcohol problem isn't in and of itself disqualifying per se. They look at everything, which includes obviously, poor judgment. So if your alcohol diagnosis, remains a concern, you're not getting any type of treatment for that, anything along those lines, then that would make you susceptible to vulnerability, and that's where that disqualifying condition comes in. Another thing, if you are getting treatment and you're not following the advice of that treating professional or the mental health professional, that is something that is also a concern that could be raised under these guidelines and the disqualifying conditions. One of the things that you don't necessarily see too often, but it does come up, is a failure to follow any court order regarding alcohol, right? So if you get a DUI and the court orders you to undergo, to take, an alcohol-related course, and you fail to do that, that could also be a disqualifying condition that could be raised under Guideline G. So again, these are guidelines, so they're left up to interpretation to a certain extent. But it is something that can essentially raise this guideline as a security concern. And then at that point, if a statement of reasons is issued, you have to go through the process to try and mitigate it. Which brings me to the next point, which is the mitigating conditions. So there are 4 mitigating conditions for Guideline G under the SEED 4. The most common that we see is, the individual is participating in counseling and getting treatment, no previous history of treatment or relapse, and they're making progress in treatment. I see that a lot. And then you essentially acknowledge that you have a problem and you're taking steps to fix it. So those are 2 of the 4 mitigating conditions that potentially can apply. The biggest thing is that when you're going through the adjudication for security clearances as it relates to Guideline G, the adjudicators want to see that you're taking steps to reduce any type of vulnerability or to take steps to ensure that similar conduct doesn't happen again, right? So for instance, if one of the concerns is you get a DUI, they want to see that you're taking steps to ensure that doesn't happen again, whether it's, you stop drinking, you're curtailing your drinking, you're more responsible by, ensuring you have a designated driver, you comply with all court orders, anything along those lines would be things that could be mitigating. So it's not 100% laid out in the mitigating conditions, but it's something that adjudicators typically want to see that you're, again, making or taking steps to ensure that similar conduct or behavior isn't repeated. Because if it is repeated, then that kind of establishes a pattern of behavior, and then that also would raise a concern potentially not only under Guideline G, but some other guidelines as well. Which brings me to my next slide, which is the most common guidelines being combined with Guideline G. So Guideline G is an alcohol-related issue, but obviously a lot of the things that we see are with DUIs or public intoxication, something like that. So a lot of times Guideline G is combined with Guideline J, which is criminal conduct, Guideline E, which is personal conduct. And this is just kind of a way to, for lack of a better term, throw everything in the kitchen sink at you. They want to ensure, or at least that's how it may seem, but the adjudicators, from their perspective, they want to ensure that they touch on every aspect of a possible security concern. So that's where this comes in. But honestly, any of the 13 adjudicative guidelines or the other 12 adjudicative guidelines, I should say, can be tacked on to a Guideline G case. It's just a matter of if all the facts work out. But realistically, any guideline can be tacked on to Guideline G. But again, the most common ones I see are the Guideline J, which is criminal conduct, and Guideline E, which is personal conduct. So that's essentially an overview of the Guideline G adjudicative guideline. Again, it's based upon the alcohol consumption. But again, just because there's an alcohol-related incident or just because there's an alcohol issue does not mean that you're automatically going to be denied a clearance. There's various different ways that you can go about mitigating the concerns. I went over a few, during this webinar, but there are other ways that you can, ensure that you try to mitigate the concerns the best you can. So with that, I'm not sure if we have any questions or there's any questions that were relayed, but I can see if I can answer any of these questions.
There doesn't seem to be any questions, Ryan.
Okay, we'll go ahead and end it then. I appreciate everybody taking the time to attend, and everybody have a good day.
Thank you.